Hello, teacher. Hello, students. Welcome to today's lesson. Students, in the previous lesson, we discussed the tourism sector. Particularly, we discussed the historical development of tourism in Ethiopia and its roles. We mentioned that tourism is the movement of people from their permanent residences for different purposes, including business, conferences, vacation, transit, visiting relatives, and others. We noted that the tourism industry was established in the 1960s, but its development was constrained after 1974 up until 1991. We discussed the reasons for its decline. We also discussed that the tourist attractions of Ethiopia could be categorized as archaeological, cultural, historical, natural, and religious. We mentioned a number of tourist sites under each category. Finally, we listed the different ways in which the tourism sector could contribute to the national and local economy. Students, in today's lesson, we will look at the performance of the tourism sector. Let's start with the contribution of tourism to Ethiopia's GDP. The share of tourism in Ethiopia's GDP is not yet significant. For example, in 2005, it was 3.5%, while in 2006, it was just 5.5%. Students, did you know why the contribution of tourism is small, despite the huge potential for tourism development in Ethiopia? Discuss in groups and answer the question. am sure you've answered the question because we've made some discussions on this in the previous lesson. But here's the answer. The contribution of tourism to our GDP is low because its growth had been constrained by lack of suitable hotels and other infrastructures, as well as the effects of drought and political instability in the past. Students, since the 1990s, however, the government has given due attention to the development of tourism in Ethiopia. The number of standard hotels and other infrastructures has increased, leading to the increase in the number of tourists visiting the country. In 2007, for example, a total of 311,943 tourists visited Ethiopia for different purposes, including business, conference, vacation, transit, family visit, and so many other reasons. The largest number of tourists, that is 30% of the tourists, are from other African countries. 26.3% came from Europe. 21.9% came from America. The rest, that is Asia, the Middle East, and Oceania countries, constitute only 21.5% of the total number of tourists. Students, to better understand the flow of tourists into Ethiopia, let's see their proportions based on purpose of the visit. The greatest numbers of tourists who visited Ethiopia for business are from Asia, followed by Africa. About 53% are from Asia and Africa. On the other hand, evidences indicate that Oceania has the weakest economic relationship with Ethiopia. The Middle East is the next least contributor in this respect. Though the figures are not country-specific, it can safely be assumed that the growing business relationship Ethiopia has with Asian countries such as China and India could be the reason for Asia's greatest share in tourist inflows, specifically for business purposes. Well, now let's see tourist inflows for conference. Before we see the evidences, I want you to do the second activity. Here's the question. Discuss in groups. Which region of residence do you think has the greatest share in tourist inflows for conferences taking place in Ethiopia? And what do you think is the reason? I hope you've all agreed in your groups that the greatest share in tourist inflow for conferences in Ethiopia comes from Africa. First, let me show you the data, and then I will tell you the reason why the greatest share is from Africa. As you can see from this graph, Africa's share in the total number of tourists who came to Ethiopia in 2007 for conferences is 30%, followed by Europe, which is 27%, and America, 22%. Oceania, the Middle East, and Asian countries are the least contributors in terms of tourist inflows for conferences. Together, their share is only 21%. The main reason for the greatest number of African tourists flowing into Ethiopia for conferences is because the African Union holds different meetings in Ethiopia, as it is the seat of the African Union and it holds many other international conferences. Representatives of African countries often travel to Ethiopia for meetings and conferences. Now, let's see the inflows based on their region of residence. But before that, I want you to answer the following multiple choice question. This time, do the activity individually. Here's the question. Which one do you think has the greatest share in the number of tourists for vacation? A. Europe and America. B. Africa and the Middle East. C. Asia and Oceania. I am sure you've chosen A, Europe and America, which is the correct answer. The greatest numbers of tourists who come to Ethiopia for vacation are from Europe and America. To be more specific, nearly 36% are from Europe and about 32% are from America. Together, these two regions constitute 68% of the total. This is because they are developed countries and their people can afford to spend money as tourists to satisfy their non-material needs. This is also the reason why our tourism promotion effort is currently geared more towards Western and other advanced countries. Unlike in the case of business or conference, the share of Africa in vacation tourism is as low as that of the Middle East, but a little bit better than Asia and much better than Oceania. Consistently, Oceania is the least contributor. Students, Europe and America are also the leading contributors in terms of inflow of tourists who come to visit their relatives. Their share amounts to 68%. Again, this could be due to the fact that there are a large number of Ethiopian diaspora in Europe and America. Finally, let's see the tourist inflows for transit, which means people who pass by Ethiopia to other countries and could visit Ethiopia only for a very short time interval, say for hours or as long as one day or a couple of days. In terms of tourism in transit, Africa alone takes the biggest share, which in this case is 76%. The rest of the regions take the remaining, which is 24% share. Students, now I want you to tell your classroom teacher the reason why so many Africans visit Ethiopia through tourist transit. Raise your hands and tell the reason to your teacher. Have you told the reason to your classroom teacher? Very good. You will hear the reason in a moment. Ethiopia is at a strategic geographic location, serving as a bridge between Europe and Asia, with the rest of Africa for different airlines. Furthermore, as Ethiopian Airlines has many destinations in Africa, many passengers pass by Ethiopia to other African countries, or vice versa. Students, let's now discuss the performance of the tourism sector in terms of foreign currency earnings during selected years. This table shows earnings from tourism in US dollars in the past 11 years. In the first 5 years, which is between 1998 and 2002, the country's earnings increased from 32,700,000 to 77,100,000 US dollars. Over this period, earnings more than doubled. In the following 5 years, that is between 2002 and 2007, earnings from tourism nearly tripled and reached almost $214 million US. However, in the year that followed, that is 2008, the country's earning declined to approximately $205 million US. This decline in earnings in 2008 is likely to have a direct link with the reduction in the number of tourists who came to Ethiopia for vacation. This graph gives this indication. From its peak in 2007, the foreign currency earnings declined drastically in 2008. I am sure you are wondering why this happened. The main reason might be the global economic crisis that had started to take place at that time. Finally, let me share with you some of the achievements the country had in terms of having the tourist attractions recognized by UNESCO as World Heritage Sites. Did you know which sites have been recognized by UNESCO as World Heritage Sites? I very much hope so. The tourist attractions which have recently been recognized by UNESCO as World Heritage Site include the following: the Aksum obelisks, the rock hewn church of Lalibela, Gondar castles, the island monasteries on Lake Tana, Hadar, a place where Lucy was discovered, Tia carved standing stones, the walls of Harar, the Semain National Park, and Konso. Konso is the most recent tourist attraction to be considered by UNESCO as a World Heritage. Now, let me wind up today's discussion by summarizing the main points of our discussion. In today's lesson, we noted that the share of tourism in Ethiopia's GDP is small. We also discussed the number of tourist inflows by region of residence and purpose of visit. Finally, we discussed the performance of the tourism sector in terms of foreign exchange earnings. Well, students, with this we end today's lesson. In the next non-plasma lesson, you will learn about the major obstacles to and possible remedies for the development of Ethiopian tourism. So see you next time in another program. Until then, goodbye teacher, goodbye students.